Mike, uh, you're right about the word reliability and robustness, although I don't exactly know the definition of either one of them. And so for me, they're close enough together in my imprecise definitions that I can interchange them. But I wasn't coming at that problem from being educated on robustness or expanding the concept like we're doing to the whole US economy. Um, I was coming at it from the point of view um, of I had worked in Amex Nickel, which was a hydrometallurgical facility um, in near Louisiana. That's where you were like 3 or something. I don't know, but you were young. Um, and it was the largest nickel and cobalt facility, the largest nickel facility that ever been built in the US and probably North America at the time. And I don't think there's probably been anything built. Maybe Canada has some facilities like near Voisey Bay that are bigger. But it was our biggest effort in the United States. And I worked pretty much in the cobalt circuit. But my education came from a 5 month period where the workers went out on strike and the management ran the plant, which was probably my best education I've ever had. And it was maybe half a dozen plant areas that were interconnected. Like there'd be pods where there'd be a lot of tanks and pumps and reactors, and it was interconnected with pipes to another area that would have different equipment, different part of the process, but they were all interconnected. And we would get something from one area and then send stuff to another area, and they all ran. And we had big storage, we call them day tanks, where you would get a 1 days of storage from the areas in front of you that you needed material from, and then you would send it to their day tank, which was in their area, to the next area that's in this complex. Well, things always break. Just a line gets plugged up, you have a cold night, you get ice in one line, it stops flowing, your input material stops, they can't pump it. I mean, it's like um, it's very hard to know what's going to go wrong. Like one night, a guy, you know, came in drunk, fell asleep, let a tank run over. It overflowed onto we had concrete pads, that were, had, they were walled. So, the spill would be made, contained. It wasn't an environmental problem. But then, not being, on top of his game, he had fallen asleep and let the tank overflow. We had sump pumps that could pump it back into the tank. That's a robustness thing. You're going to screw up. When you do make the mistake, you have a way to correct it. But he put the valves in the wrong, um, turned the wrong valves, and he sent it to the wrong tank. And then it got mixed up with other material um, that it had no business being mixed up with, which was not something that we had planned for. And then when the analysis of all the tanks came in every morning, we pulled samples and kind of got an overview of what's going on in the plant. Now it would be much more sophisticated, but that's still a lot of damn work to look at the composition and flag anything that's out of line. Well, this tank got flagged, and because we didn't know that spill occurred, because that guy and other people were covering up his mistake, we came up with like a million theories to explain the composition in this tank. and what had gone wrong with the process, and it rippled back to the previous area. They must have sent us crap, and now we're in a big mess here because we got a day tank that's got uh, this stuff we can't process. Um, and I was told in confidence by one of the other people, because they knew if this guy, the truth came out, the guy'd get fired, and his fellow workers were protecting him. Well, once I understood what happened, you know, you see the problem, crap, I can come up with a plan knowing what happened instead of this crazy stories we were making up. And I went back to my boss and said, I know what happened. I can take care of it. I can solve this. And he says, well, tell me what happened. And I said, I can't tell you. And they said, what do you mean you can't tell me? And I said, a guy screwed up. And he said, well, tell me who screwed up and we'll get rid of him. And I said, no. I said, if I tell you that, I didn't know the word then, but the robustness of my ability to do this job will go downhill, because the guy told me in confidence. I told him I would keep it tight to my chest and I would figure out the problem. So I didn't say this to my boss, but I can't tell him my source, because it's going to get a guy fired. And then that source is going to, his buddy just got fired because he told me and he trusted me not to spread what really happened. And I told him I couldn't fix the problem without knowing what happened, which it did. I did know how to, I didn't know instantly how to figure it out, but understanding what happened and that it was a once off, I could come up with a plan. Well, my boss was pissed off at me, but I didn't tell him. And I went to fixing the problem and just told him to tell the, plant manager and everybody else I was on top of it, which I had enough of a reputation that I pulled it off, and not necessarily without a lot of personal friction, but I pulled it off. And part of it was because our system at AMAX was very robust. In many cases, we almost always had two pumps that could do a job and two sets of pipes, which is obviously more expensive than one set of pipes. And in cases where we'd had a lot of trouble, we would have two backups. And so I had worked in this environment, and I knew human beings are involved, mistakes are involved, equipment breaks down, pipes freeze up. There's no end to something as complicated as that plant, to the number of things that can go wrong. So you build in a lot of redundancy that costs money. It's not like it's cheap or inexpensive. I mean, most of the piping was some grade of stainless steel, so it cost more money. But the people that built that plant had obviously worked in some other plant, and they had built up this, like things are going to go wrong, and you got to be able to cover your ass like from 10 directions at once. And then even when you build it that way, it doesn't always work. But when you correct a problem, you correct it with giving yourself more flexibility and, more robustness for the next problem. And you gradually build up a system that's pretty robust and that you can keep going. Well, my gut reaction when I saw the plant in Australia is like, none of you guys have worked in a plant of this complexity. You have no idea. Like, they're saying, well, all this isn't going to happen at once. Well, no, it isn't. But something's going to happen that we're not even talking about. I mean, we don't even know what it is. But you can't have a plant that has these, like, one way to get things done type thing. You need, backups. And so I wasn't addressing the problem from a, philosophical, discipline about robustness. I was addressing it from, I've worked in a plant that I don't think it was quite as complex as the Australian plant. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was quite a bit less complex. But in fact, the complexity just, like blew my mind out. Actually, I was having a hard time. I always had been able to look at a flow sheet and understand it like right away. And this one, I remember one day sitting with a big, massive flow sheet with lines going everywhere. And I started color coding, like I'm going to color ammonia in red. I'm going to do sulfuric acid in blue, and I'm going to trace. So I had this flow sheet and I had the whole thing like a grid of colors of everything going every way. And I was trying to wrap my head around how to make this thing operate. And I was really struggling. And in that first meeting we had where the guy said, they told us you're a really smart, first rate, the best kind of process engineer there is, and you don't seem to be able to understand how we're telling you this is going to operate. And I said back to the guy, I said, one of us doesn't understand, but it's not real clear to me who that is. And well, I was in the minority. I mean, everyone else understood. But I'm betting that none of them had ever worked in a facility of that complexity anywhere close to it. They'd graduated from college and they had never run a plant and been there at 2 a.m. in the morning when all shit breaks loose. And you got 10 things going on at one time and you don't have a way out of the problem. And that's what I kind of at gut level felt when I was looking at this flow sheet and listening to them talk, that, wow, you guys just, you haven't been there. You don't know how messed up this can get. So anyway, so mine wasn't from, being brilliant in the realm of robustness. It was being, having hard knocks working in the Amex plant, which was a great education, especially during the strike when the workers weren't there, who covered all sorts of problems that we never knew existed, because they were being, helping the system work, and they adapted because that's what us humans do. But anyway, that's a little add-on to the story. Talk to you later, son. Bye.